Hi, everybody. This is Paul Young. I'm going to be in Cincinnati, Ohio, November 14th and 15th of this year, 2025, and some friends. Some of them from the William Paul Young Initiative that is sponsoring this, and the email for that is wpyi.org. The weekend will be an immersive. That is, that it'll be encounter centered, it'll be fun, it'll be deep. We're going to eat really well, because we always do. And we like to keep these groups small enough to do communal interaction and connections. We're going to go deeper together in ways that heal our souls as we focus on our image of God and what it means to be fully human. Our focus is on Trinitarian relational love. It's just a beautiful time. So we also want to talk about how to live this life in the ordinariness of our lives, in the everyday, no matter what we are or do or face or any of that kind of thing. So if you are interested, go over to wpyi.org and click on the upcoming events, and you'll find some information, and then you can register there. So if you're coming, I look forward to seeing you. Big hugs, and we'll talk to you later. Hey, folks, welcome to the Paul Young Podcast. Today we're going to do story number 2 of Jason Upton's visit with me. Again, Jason is a musician, has been for a lot of years. A sweet human being, loves Jesus, loves the beautiful gospel. He is telling stories. It's one of the things that I love to do. This one, like the other two, are very deeply touching in so many different respects. So here we go.
You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
I think, generally speaking, is other people's favorite song that you've written.
Maybe the first song that they ever heard me sing.
Yeah.
Often, I think the way it is for artists is the distinction of somebody's voice. I often find that somebody will say to me, "Oh, the Faith record is my favorite record of yours." And somebody else will come along and they'll say, "Table Full of Strangers, that is my first favorite record of yours. Table Full of Strangers 2 is my favorite record of yours. The Home to Me song."
Yeah.
That's a song for me too, because it's about my story. And so I used to kind of say, "Oh, that's kind of strange," people that would just tell you that. Then I read an article interviewing Neil Young, and Neil Young was asked, "What do you think people's favorite song is of yours?" And he said, "The first song they ever heard me sing."
Wow.
And it's such a powerful statement. And so I started asking people when they would say that to me, I would say, "Is that the first song you ever heard me sing?" "Yeah, it's the first song I ever heard you sing." So if
Wow.
it was Table Full of Strangers, first song they ever heard me sing.
Wow.
There's something about like the moment that you connect with someone. And I thought, well, that's kind of the way it is with me too. When I listen to people,
Uh-huh.
there's a connection that happens.
Yeah.
It's,
Oh,
it's
that's so good. That's very insightful from Neil.
yeah,
Yeah. So tell us your story.
yeah. Well, I always say I was the product of evangelism gone bad. Or Rachel says maybe good when you hear my story, but my biological mother gave her heart to Jesus. She was the first person in her family to give her heart to Jesus in the early 70s. And she had already been flown by a very significant person in her life to New York City to abort a child at 16. And then in between that, she kind of gave her heart to the Lord. And she went to a bowling alley, I guess that's what they did back then in Minnesota. And she was trying to reach people for the Lord. And so she met this boy and she tried to reach him, introduce him to Jesus. And they slept together instead. And I was the product of that. She was upper 17s and he was just turned 16. His father had died when he was 13. He found him in a boiler room at the age of 13, dying from cirrhosis of the liver. So he was raised by his mother. Hilda was her name. And so she was encouraged by his mother and him. So they weren't even followers of Jesus, but they would say, "We think the child should live." And Hilda said, "I'll work 3 jobs if you keep the baby." And she said, "Well," and then the Catholics and Lutherans, both Lutheran social services and Catholic groups, kind of gathered around her. And so she decided to give it a try. So she tried to keep me. I was born December 1973, December 15th, 1973, and I was adopted March 13th, 1974.
Okay.
And she tried to keep me for several months, and then she just couldn't, which now I realize that's so traumatic for a mother to do that. I mean, how strong she had to be to keep me. Number one, she was, they were going to try to fly her to New York City and do the same kind of with me. And in some ways, that was kind of the person that wanted to do that for her was trying to, in their way, to help her, right?
Yeah.
But she just decided, I think this child needs to live. And so she knitted me little outfits, but there was a lot of, biological father and her weren't going to be getting married. And yeah, there was just a lot to it. And so she just decided, I'm going to give him up for adoption. So she found this family in Minnesota, Bonnie and Bob Upton, and that was her pick. She picked my parents to adopt me, and I was raised by my mom and dad that raised me. I mean, I was in church every Sunday. My older brother, it was just two of us. He was adopted from a different family. My parents weren't able to have biological children. And so, but they were just such good parents. And they just had us in church all the time. My dad and mom were both in business, but they loved church and they loved us. And so we were in church Sunday morning, Sunday night. It was back in the 70s. So I remember falling asleep on my mother's lap in Sunday night services, listening to songs, I mean, there would be like 3-hour services back then. My mom would put her hands through my hair. I just remember that. And then life, kind of went on. And I grew up, I was 13 and my dad, I loved I had very good experiences with church folks and preachers. And I wanted to be like these people. Even when I was 16, I was mentored by Robert Stamps, who was married to,
He wrote a
Robert.
great song.
Oh, yeah.
Come to the Table.
Which isn't that crazy that I wrote A Table Full of Strangers and then I put that together?
Ah,
When God and man at table, we sat down,
yeah.
right? What a
Yeah.
beautiful song. And he was my first mentor at 16.
Wow.
He saw me singing in Minneapolis and he was speaking and he said, "Have you ever had a mentor?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, do you have a car?" I said, "Yeah, I just bought one. I have this lawn mowing jobs that I have. I bought this little Mazda." He said, "Well, meet me at 6:00 a.m. at Kieran's Family Restaurant." And away we went. He was the one that introduced me to Henry Now. And of course, he was married to Ellen. And Ellen was, the right-hand woman to Corrie ten Boom. And they had met in England. And they just led me to so many good things at 16 and introduced me. He was the first person that said, Jason, because he would always ask me, he's in this huge church. He's in his 60s at that time. And he would ask me, "So what do you think?" Well, I'm 16, what do you think? And I would share my heart. So one day he says to me, "Jason, you're a poet. I've read poets my whole life. I've been around poets. You're a poet." I said, "Bob, I've never even written a poem." He said, "Oh, no, that's not what it's. You're going to write poems, but you probably should start, but you think like a poet.
Mm.
And you communicate like a poet and you feel like a poet. You're a poet and you just need to know that. So here's some poets I want you to read. And here is a person, Henry Now, and I think you should read this book and this book. And these will be good for your heart." So 16, 17, 18, he was kind of mentoring me.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it was remarkable. I had a good childhood. My parents were really cool with that too. I went to Park Avenue United Methodist Church in downtown Minneapolis, an integrated church there at the time. It was one of the few, and certainly in the Midwest. And I was introduced to songwriting and that I was a songwriter and that I was a poet and all of that. And I started to write music. And my parents were like, "Hey, as long as you're connecting with the Lord, we don't care where you go to church. Just do it, And so time went on and I ended up going to college and then to university and got married and wrote music but I was going to say at 13, I had always had those kind of experiences. I didn't meet Bob until I was 16, but when I was 13, all of my experiences, whether it was my parents, the witness, like John 1, that John came as a witness so that all might believe. It was like, it's important that Jesus comes into the world, but somebody's got to be a witness. And my parents were incredible witnesses and they had a group of friends. My experience with church growing up was what people said was who they were. And that was my experience. So I wanted to be like them. And I wanted to be like preachers. And and so my dad asked me for my 13th birthday, "What do you want, Jason? You want a new bike?" And I said, "Dad, there was a thing called the Thompson Chain Reference Bible."
Oh, I remember it well.
And I said, "Dad, I want a Thompson Chain Reference Bible." And he said, "What?" Yeah. He said, "How about I get you a Thompson Chain Reference Bible and a new bike?" And I said, "Okay." And so they got me this Bible and I read that thing. I still have it. I just read it and read it and read it and underlined it. And you know how you just do it. So anyway, I get a little older. I go through college, and then Rachel and I are married, and she's 25, I'm 27. We're through seminary. And at 27 and 25, I mean, it's also miraculous. Rachel was miraculously healed of endometriosis that was so severe she was not going to be able to have children. And a friend of ours was praying over Rachel once she got pregnant, which was a miracle in and of itself. And he said, I see a son rising in the womb of a mother like Samuel. You know, if you walk in the fear of the Lord instead of the fear of man, and something like that, you know, your son and an entire generation will have favor with God and man, like Samuel. So we find out a few weeks later, we go in and find out what we're having, and they say, you're having a boy. And of course, it was easy. We named him Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
Then by the time we were, 29, I was 29, we're pregnant again. Rachel's pregnant again, and Emma's on the way. And the doctor says, you ought to maybe look into, we're living in Wisconsin now. You ought to maybe look into finding out your biological history so your kids have that. It had been in the back of my mind, but never really, really forward part of my mind because I had had such a good upbringing. So I went to my parents and I asked them, how do you guys feel about this? They said, oh, we've been waiting. This will be so exciting. And if you need any money or anything, just let us know. Whatever you need from us. We just, we're excited about it.
So the doctor is saying it would be good so that you have the medical information.
The medical information. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Yeah. So I said, okay. So I went through the process with my parents, and then I called Lutheran Social Services. And the lady on the line that I get, she immediately says, oh, your mother is going to be so excited. She's been calling in because I had a closed adoption. So I was the only person that could open it.
Uh-huh.
She says, your mother's been calling in since you were 18. And then I kind of felt a little bit bad. I was like, wow, that's terrible. She's just been waiting all this time and I never opened this adoption. But has he opened it yet? Has he opened it? Has he reached out? And I found out later that her mother had money and means, and they had said, hey, you can hire an investigator to find out where he is. But she felt like that it would break sort of the covenant that she had made with God. And so she just chose not to.
Mm.
So I reach out to Lutheran Social Services and they say, oh, she's going to be so excited. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you a manila envelope that was closed the day you were adopted. And it was given to us. And when you open the adoption, we're to send it to you. So this is almost 30 years old. It's like a time capsule. So the lady from Lutheran Social Services sends me this manila envelope. And the next day I drive down to Lake Michigan to kind of be by myself and open this manila envelope.
And that manila envelope is from your mom?
My biological mother. Yep.
Okay.
She put all of the things, all of my belongings and all the things that she wanted me to have the moment I opened my adoption in that manila envelope. So a little outfit she had made for me and pictures of the bedroom that I slept in, the crib that I was in, all that kind of stuff. I open it and there's a letter. It's a handwritten letter. And it says to Stephen, because she had named me Stephen. It says, to Stephen, one thing I ask of the Lord, that you'll dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life, that you'll be a worshiper. I'm doing it quicker than it was, but that you'll have a hunger for scripture when you're very young, which now I'm weeping because I already have multiple records out. I've been doing music my whole life at that time. The story, obviously, that I told of my dad asking me what I wanted for 13th birthday, and me for some odd reason wanting a Bible, and then reading the Bible the whole day. I mean, it was like all of a sudden I'm seeing these as grace gifts from the Lord being poured out on me because of the prayers of my biological mother, just the covenant. That God will keep covenant, she said in the letter, between us while we're apart from one another. She had read that from the scripture and threw that verse in there, it was just all these little things. And a lot of shame stuff too. I hope you're better than I was as a child and did all these things too. But those are the highlights for me. It wasn't that stuff. It was this other stuff.
Yeah.
And so the next day I reach out to Lutheran Social Services and I said, I think I'm ready. And they give me her name and her number, and they've made her aware that I'm going to call, but she doesn't know my name. That's my job to tell her my name. So I literally practiced it, Paul. I practiced it like you'd ask your wife to marry you or something. I'm like, how is this going to happen? Am I going to recognize her voice? It was just, you're nervous. you get this feeling in your stomach. You're just like, well, how is this going to happen? And what am I going to say? And so I remember sitting at Lake Michigan, practicing the way I was going to communicate to her.
Yeah, she doesn't know your name.
She doesn't know my name.
Yeah.
She thinks my name is Steven. Hi, I'm Jason Upton. I'm your biological son. Oh, that's a little bit over the top. Hi, I'm Jason Upton. I mean, ultimately, it just comes out how it comes out, right? But I practiced for a little bit, and then finally I just got the nerve and I just called her and I said, Hi, my name is Jason Upton, and I'm your biological son. And I'm so happy to be able to have a conversation with you. And she bursts into laughter and tears and screaming and, oh God, you're so good. And then she gives the phone to her now husband, who isn't my biological father, and says, You got to take the phone. And he takes the phone, gives me his name, and says, It's all good, but she's just going to have to call you later
Hmm.
because this is just overwhelming. So it was a little awkward. I get off the phone. She calls me a bit later that evening. She says, I'm sorry, I was just so overwhelmed. But, I used to always feel this oppression that would come over me that Stephen was dead, that God didn't answer any of the prayers for you, that I would go to my mother and she would always be saying, Oh, we can get a private investigator. We can find out if he's alive. But deep inside me, it was more just, did God keep covenant? Did God answer my prayer? Did God keep his side of the bargain? And that sounds kind of transactional, but it was very beautiful when she said it to me. It was just her desire, her hope. And she said, and so I would go into this, there was this church in St. Paul that I would go into, and they had this prayer room set up. And I would often go into that prayer room, and the ladies would all gather around me, and I'd tell them, I feel this oppression over me that, Steve and I had put him up for adoption, and I really asked the Lord for some things. And now it's been 28 years, 27 years, 25 years, whatever it was at that time, and never heard anything from him. And is he dead? Is he gone? Did he get into drugs? Did he, all of that. So they'd pray over me, and the oppression would lift. And then one day, she said, after 2 or 3 times of going in there, I would say to them, I just always feel like it lifts and then it comes back on me. And one of the ladies said, Well, maybe it's not the prayer room. Maybe it's the music we listen to. And they had made a little burned CD of their favorite, at the time, Jason Upton prayer songs. They said, There's this music we listen to. It's by a guy named Jason Upton. So they burned her copy of it, and then they put in Sharpie on the top of it, Jason Upton. And then she put that in her, you used to have those visors where you put your CDs
Yeah.
in her little visor thing. And when the oppression would come on where she was praying for Stephen, she'd put in the Jason Upton CD and the oppression would lift. So when I called her and I said, Hi, my name's Jason Upton. I'm your biological son, she was just overwhelmed. And of course, I was overwhelmed just even knowing that, just the goodness of God, the providence of God, the faithfulness of God. Just know it's so real. It's not pie in the sky, it's real.
Yeah. I think when I listened to that, you said something about it was the only music that would help her when she was in the middle of those times.
Hmm.
And she would just play your songs.
Yeah.
Golly. The redeeming genius,
Yeah.
you know. I love that story. How are you with her now?
Really a special thing. It's been a little bit complicated. I've met my biological father, I've met her. It can be a little complicated because I have such a great relationship with my mom and dad, and my kids, of course, were young.
Yeah.
But both of them have been so honoring without me asking
Yeah.
of my parents that raised me, and then their longing for relationship. But it's not without, for me, as I'm aging, I'm 51. So a lot of things start coming up and being open. There's some things that have come up that you don't really realize. I mean, adoption is a real detachment.
Yeah. It is. And a real sense of abandonment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Did I feel abandoned? No, God put all these amazing people in my life, but you realize that you have the ability to attach. Adopted kids have the ability to attach really quickly. And
Yeah.
so being in the work that I'm in the family language of church, but realizing the last time I heard somebody love me, when I was a little kid, I was not even a teenager. I remember a boy at the bus stop said to me, You're just like a kid that your parents can send you back anytime
Yeah.
if you're bad. And of course, I grew up in the church. I thought, oh, I'm definitely bad enough to get sent back, but I didn't even know where back was.
Yeah.
Right. I remember my dad that night, I multiple times called him up to my room, but I was scared to know the answer. So I didn't say anything. And eventually he just sat at the end of my bed until I told him. And I said, this boy at the bus stop that was older than me, by probably a year, but I thought he was so full of, knowledge. I just burst into tears. I've been real bad, Dad, real bad. I'm bursting into tears. Please don't send me back. And my dad took me by the shoulders, and he always calls me Jace. So my dad, Jace, look at me. When I adopted you, I had to sign a contract that I would never disown you and I would never disinherit you. And to be honest, Paul, I didn't even know what those words meant at that time.
Yeah.
But it's weird that I remember those words. I can never disinherit you and I can never disown you. Well, in an adoption contract in Minnesota in 1974, that's exactly what it says. I can never be disowned. I can never be disinherited. I'm stuck with you. I'm your dad forever. And I remember believing my dad. And I knew, oh, I'm never going to be sent back, But realizing there's just a lot to that. And it's probably having such a great dad that I have, but also having that, it's probably why I have such a poetic heart. And I'm such a heart person, a sensitive soul. I read a story, I start weeping, I write a song about it as if it was my own experience, right? But to be in the church world, like I said, and there's a lot of that language, and a lot of times we say spiritual fathering or we're a part of a family. That process is, man, that's a sucker punch to the soul, isn't it? Like an unborn baby in a